Keir Starmer after years of Labour losses. His promise to you, a government that can get things done.
We're a changed Labour Party, and yesterday we started the work of changing the country.
Well, one of his first cabinet ministers who's joining us for the first time on a Sunday is Jonathan Reynolds, who becomes the business secretary. Jonathan, I have to say, when I saw you walking up Downing Street on Friday, I have never seen a group of people who looked like they were in such a rush. What did it feel like?
It was a very special moment, really special personally, but special for the group of people that were assembling that cabinet and what it will mean for the future. OK,
politics is personal as well as professional, of course it is. Well, Jonathan's boss, Keir Starmer, is on the road meeting first ministers today and mayors soon. One of them, Labour's Andy Burnham, will join us too.
To the country, I would like to say first and foremost, I am sorry.
Well, he might be sorry, but what and who is next for Rishi Sunak's Conservatives? Here are the likely leadership contenders. Perhaps there could be more. Well, Robert Jenrick and Victoria Atkins, who might both fancy it, are here with us this morning to start the conversation. But more of you voted for the other parties than ever before. One of the victors, Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, will join us this morning too. And at the desk with me today, the Unite the Union leader, Sharon Graham, historian Simon Sharma, because it is a moment of history, and a man who knows a thing or two about being in opposition, the former Conservative leader, Lord Michael Howard. Morning, morning. Let's start, as we always do, with a look at the news. The Observer has the new Prime Minister on the front page saying it's time to deliver. The Express leads with something that he has already done, burying the Conservatives' Rwanda scheme, saying it's dead and buried. A former Prime Minister told the Sunday Times that Labour needs a plan for immigration. And the former Home Secretary, who knows a thing or two about migration, Suella Braverman, tells The Telegraph that the Tories deserved to lose. And, of course, that other big contest, the football, is a big story for most of the papers as England reached the Euros semis, beating Switzerland last night. Well, let's start then our conversation this morning. Simon, as a historian, something like this is real history, isn't it? It happens so rarely, this kind of real change.
Yes, and it's quite true, Laura. Landslides, really, however much people are saying immediately, a loveless landslide, I think actually was one phrase. Not really landslide, a pseudo-landslide. Nonetheless, it's a reboot of democracy, which is always a very healthy thing. One should say that many landslides in the past, this is not including Tony Blair or Margaret Thatcher, but you know, modern history for us, namely 1832.
I'll just note that one down.
Governments come in with colossal, sky-high expectations, and that particular government was eaten away within, you know, not so many years. The Khaki election, Michael doesn't remember that, it was 1900. Massive Conservative majority, lost it. And famously, the most famous of all, was 1906, huge Liberal landslide, huge. By 4 years later, 1910, something like more than 200 majority was down to almost nothing. But this is different. This is different. This is very, I think, rather shrewdly presented by the Prime Minister, by Keir Starmer, as not that there are these big problems. The other lot have caused them, but don't expect miracles. So it's not an ecstatic. Yes.
Yeah. Michael, your lot got absolutely hammered, didn't they? Why?
All sorts of reasons. First of all, if you look all over the world, and people are taking it out on their governments. Macron's party's gone to third place. The ruling Social Democrats in Germany have gone to third place. Got a new government in the Netherlands, which kicked out its former prime minister. All over the world, people are punishing governments because they are not as well off as they would like to be because of COVID and inflation and the war and all those things. And it's a very natural tendency to blame governments. And we have, the last government did exacerbate that trend somewhat by some of the things that it did. I freely concede. Let me just say, I do wish the new government here well. I hope they succeed. As Rishi Sunak said, their successes will be our successes. Everyone wants a successful country.
It's interesting.
And I hope that happens.
It's interesting the last few days, actually, there's been quite a lot of gracious concession, actually. Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt were both quite flattering about the new Prime Minister. But, Sharon, there are immediate and urgent problems. One of them you know very well about, and maybe people watching as well might be worried about too. So there's a real risk of jobs at the Talbot steel plant in Wales. Your union had planned to strike while this uncertainty is going on, but you delayed that, or you called it off because of the election. So what's the issue? Because we're about to talk to the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds.
Well, look, I mean, obviously congratulate Labour for getting in, but they won't have a lot of a honeymoon period because there are lots of things that need to be dealt with. And steel is an example, it's a symbol of what's happening in our country. We're just about to have a situation where 2,800 steel workers could lose their jobs in a matter of days. That's not over-egging that. In a matter of days, as soon as they put forward those redundancy notices. Now, what I'm saying really clearly is the steel industry in Britain has been decimated. We produce less steel in Britain than one single site in Germany. Less steel, even though we're very high consumers of steel. So I'm asking for two things. One is investment in steel with jobs guarantees. And the other one is on procurement legislation that all UK infrastructure projects should use UK steel. We need to back British steel. We need to back British business. Investment is going to be key, and we need to find the money for that.
OK, well, let's see if this new government will find the money as you are after. Well, the transfer of power, when it comes in this country, is shockingly quick. In less than 24 hours, one PM's out and the other has moved in. This is how it started on Thursday night on the stroke of 10. As Big Ben strikes 10, the exit poll is predicting a Labour landslide.
Blimey, just take a look.
Bridget Mead-Phillipson has been duly elected.
Rachel Reeves is duly elected.
Dan Norris is duly elected.
Labour gains, Labour gains, Labour gains.
Jonathan Ashworth has lost his seat.
We did it!
Here come the Outriders. They'll flank him everywhere he goes.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace, where I accepted an invitation from His Majesty the King to form the next government.
The first ever female Chancellor of the Exchequer. To every young woman and girl.
Absolutely fantastic to welcome you to the Cabinet, our first meeting.
Have you unpacked yet?
No, we're not unpacked quite yet.
Well, in they went. We'll just mark this moment of history before we get on to the urgent issues. You were sitting around that cabinet table yesterday. Your family was actually in Downing Street. I think we spotted them in the pictures we can show people this morning when Keir Starmer walked in. In one regard, though, some people are thinking this was an election the Conservatives lost rather than an election that Labour won. Do you think that is part of it?
No, I don't. I think Labour has a clear mandate to govern. I think the first party in a generation to win a majority of seats in England, Wales and Scotland is a significant achievement. But I thought Keir Starmer, the new Prime Minister, was right in those words outside Downing Street to say this is a government that will work for everyone, public service at the core of it, and that means we'll listen and respect and work for people who didn't support us as well. I think that's the kind of approach, constructive approach, public service-based approach people want to see. OK, well, let's talk about then something that is right at the top of your list at the moment. We've heard there from Sharon Graham that there are nearly 3,000 jobs at risk at the Tata Steel plant in Port Talbot. What are you going to do? Will the government step in, write a cheque to underwrite it so those jobs do not disappear? Yes, we see this as a major priority. I've already spoken to Tata Steel about it, as has the new Prime Minister. Made time for that conversation. I'll be talking to them again today. I'll be asking representatives of the workforce, Sharon and Unite, but also Community and GMB, to talk to me next week about that. It's not about underwriting loss-making businesses in perhaps a way we might have thought of industrial policy in the past. It is about being a partner for investment in the future. There is more money available for the steel industry under our plans for government. But that's about making sure we meet this transition with the private sector together and recognise, I think Sharon used the phrase, it is a good example of how we have to make sure that decarbonisation is not deindustrialisation, and we've got to do that together. But there is a better deal available for Port Talbot and the steel industry as a whole, I'm sure of that. So what's happening there is that the old blast furnaces
the company wants to close them, but there's a gap until their newer, greener furnace can be built, and that would employ far fewer people. You say their money will be available. How much are you willing to spend in order to guarantee those jobs, and are you guaranteeing those jobs this morning?
Well, the money we have available to spend is in our manifesto, so that's in the public domain.
It's £2.5 billion, but how much would you spend
2.5 billion on top of the £500 million already in the government spending plans. You'll understand I'm now involved in a negotiation, and I'm not going to reveal my hand. I think that people would understand why that is the case. I do want things in exchange for money we'll co-invest with the private sector around jobs and technology. I think that's a reasonable way to make sure public money is being well spent. And I believe there are things, capacities, the steel industry in the UK needs in future that could be part of that conversation. And that is what I'll be having in the next few days.
But will you guarantee those jobs, as Sharon Graham has asked you to do?
I'm going to make sure that job guarantees are part of the negotiation that we're having.
So if Tata Steel is to receive money from the British taxpayer, in return, they have to guarantee those jobs in Port Talbot?
There will be a range of issues that we are being engaged in now to discuss. I'm not going to put a particular figure on it.
But that sounds like you're hinting at that, but not quite guaranteeing it.
So blast furnaces employ more people than some of the newer technologies available, whether that is electric arc furnaces or what is called DRI. So there's a range of things you have to understand. But I absolutely agree with the point that we have to make sure this is a transition that works for working people and that they're part of that. And you can't simply give money out without guarantees in exchange for that. But there is a negotiation, and I'm going to have to keep a little bit of that information to myself while I engage.
But how quickly do you think you can resolve this? Because as Sharon said, actually, there are jobs at stake in the next few days. And you and your colleagues have just spent the last 6 weeks going around the country saying, oh, we're ready, we're prepared, we're absolutely ready to hit the ground running. This is a decision you knew was coming. Can you tell us when you are going to sort it out? Because the clock is ticking very loudly. Laura,
not only have we been running that campaign, we have been preparing for government at the same time, including playing an active role in making sure the outcome none of us wanted in Port Talbot, which could have happened last week.
So when will there be a decision or deal?
So this is a priority. The timescale is not a large one. I've asked colleagues across every part of this negotiation for some time to do that. That isn't a lot of time, but I do need a few weeks to get that ready.
So
but we've started straight away.
But a few weeks then before this will be resolved?
We have started those discussions straight away. There'll be some issues on the company side around due diligence, but I do believe a better deal is available, and I do think this is a way we can demonstrate how we can make this transition in a way which works for the UK, for the workforce and the company, and is about economic strength and a positive story, not a negative one.
Now, one of the things that you also promised was a big expansion of rights for workers. That's now going to be under your department, although Angela Rayner, the now Deputy Prime Minister, has a leadership role. She's talked about that a lot. When will those new rights for workers come into force?
We will start the process straight away, as we were committed to doing so. Obviously, as any piece of employment legislation, you will have a consultation period. I'm told new cabinet ministers aren't supposed to preempt the King's speech, but you know this will play a role within it, of course, because of the public commitments that we have made. But again, we think this is an important part of an overall economic programme to make sure we're not just growing the economy more strongly, but it's benefiting people in every part of the UK.
But how quickly will people watching this morning actually have extra rights in the workplace?
Well, some of those things...
You used to say you'd do it within the first 100 days of a Labour government.
Well, we will start the process. It will begin in the first 100 days. Obviously, some of those things are decisions that will effectively apply immediately in terms of Conservative legislation, which we will remove from the statute book. Other things will obviously become law once you've been through that very significant process of passing a piece of legislation under how the House of Commons and the House of Lords and Parliament operates. But we will begin that process immediately.
And on one of the specifics in that legislation we've talked about in the studio before, it's very important to many people. If you think about what happened at British Airways, for example, this idea of fire and rehire. So when big businesses can get rid of staff, take them back on under less good terms and conditions. Now, during the campaign, you said that there could be some exemptions to that. Is that what's going to happen? Because that's not what was originally promised to the unions at the beginning of this process.
Absolutely clear on this. We oppose fire and rehire. We will ban fire and rehire.
Ban completely?
We will do that in the way which other parliamentarians have tried to do, attempts at legislation as part of this. We recognise where there are occasions where a company needs to do a change of circumstances because, frankly, the business would be lost if it wasn't for that. We understand, but it's the process you go through, and it's about making sure we don't see an economy that tries to be competitive simply by lowering the terms and conditions of the workers. I don't believe people in business want that. It's only in the most egregious examples where we have seen that, and we will continue. We know what the legislative approach needs to be, but you should not doubt our commitment to prevent that happening. OK,
well, you spent a lot of time in the last couple of years schmoozing the business community, so it will be very interesting to see how that unfolds. Let's talk about some of the results, because clearly Labour had an absolutely massive win on Thursday night, no question about that. But in some pockets of the country, we saw there in our tape, Jonathan Ashworth, colleague of yours, lost his seat in Leicester to an independent candidate who said his victory was for Gaza. Jess Phillips, Birmingham MP, very nearly came a cropper for the same reason. Wes Streeting, your colleague, now the Health Secretary, East London MP, also nearly came a cropper. Dewsbury and Batley, an area with a high Muslim population, was lost. What are you going to do about this issue? Clearly, there are pockets of the population who look at Labour, who look at particularly Keir Starmer's position on the Gaza-Israel conflict and think, I cannot vote for them. What are you going to do about it?
Well, look, you saw in those results how complicated, how challenging British politics is. Even on an outstanding night for Labour, you've lost colleagues who played a major part in the turnaround of the party's fortunes and the contribution they made on a personal level. I regret that very, very much.
But this is a really clear issue. What are you going to do about it?
We will take any loss of support seriously. We know how strongly people feel about the issues you're talking about. We know and appreciate why they are frustrated. We will always act in the interest of the country, not in narrow party interest. I think what people in those circumstances want to see are some real progress towards not just the end of the conflict in Israel and Gaza, but a real peace process. Now we've got the chance to be the government to deliver on that agenda. I think our positions that we have taken, look, people look at them, but they want to see some progress. And I do understand that. Now we can do that with the government.
But are you concerned that in the undergrowth of this election, there are trends that do make some mainstream politicians concerned, whether or not that's you losing the support in many Muslim communities, or whether it's Nigel Farage scooping up votes with his Reform Party, because he was taking votes from Labour, people who'd voted Labour previously, as well as from the Conservatives, and he says he's coming after you. Are you concerned about some of the trends that we saw in the weeds of the election, if you like?
Of course, we've got an outstanding mandate, but of course we take seriously and we'll analyse those results. I did meet in this election good people who were telling me they were thinking about voting Reform. That doesn't mean Reform are good people. When you were able to tell people, well, look, this is what they believe. They support the economic policies of Liz Truss. They support the foreign policies of Vladimir Putin. People are horrified. But now a party like Reform, now it has members of Parliament, will come under the kind of scrutiny which they maybe always should have come under. And they will find that very difficult. And we will come for them. We will tell people what their agenda would mean for their economic security, for their national security. And we'll relish that argument because we know we're in the right place. And a party like Reform is frankly not.
Do you think they're not good people? You hinted they were not good people.
I think the people who voted Reform are good people, often didn't know the full agenda of Reform. I've got to be frank, backing the Kremlin's position in Ukraine is not in the national interest of the United Kingdom.
OK, Jonathan Reynolds, well, as the first Cabinet Minister join us on a Sunday morning, it's good to have you with us. Thank you very much indeed. Now, in the next few days, Keir Starmer will be off on his travels. He's travelling across the UK to meet First Ministers and then Metro Mayors. Well, one of them is Labour's Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester. He sat round the Cabinet table himself when Gordon Brown was in number 10. Here he is, watching the exit poll on Thursday. I think it's fair to say he was quite pleased with the results. And he is with us this morning. I think we can speak to him, I think, from his back garden in Greater Manchester. Though they're still beaming, Andy Burnham. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Are you sad not to be around the Cabinet table?
Laura. No, I'm really excited, actually, to be in the position I am in, because I think this is going to be a great era for the English cities and the English regions, and Greater Manchester will be at the forefront of that, with a government saying that its core mission is growth. Well, Greater Manchester has been growing faster than the UK economy in recent times, and we've got so much more to give. So, no, I wouldn't swap my position for anything, Laura, but I look forward very much to working with Keir and his team.
You're due to meet Keir Starmer along with the other mayors in the next few days, but with such a massive majority, he doesn't actually have to listen to you. How are you going to make sure that he does?
Well, I'm sure he will, but as I just said, we need to get this country growing in all parts of the country, and devolution to the big city regions is the way to do that, as Greater Manchester has proved. One thing I will say to Keir and the new government: commit early to the Northern Powerhouse, deliver what the Tories said they would do but never did. I think that would be a very wise move, because it would create a path to growth. And also, I think, would lay the foundations for a second Labour term. If people here in the north of England see that change come through in a parliament, then I think they will stick with this government for the long haul. And what does that mean in practice? Well, it means in this parliament, for instance, making a start on work for that new railway between Liverpool and Manchester. These are the things that we can move on really quickly, and that's why this is such an exciting moment.
Those things are pretty expensive, though. I mean, you're calling then today for extra financial commitments to the north of England, things that weren't in the Labour manifesto necessarily because of Rachel Reeves' tight grip on the chequebook.
Well, to be fair, the last government left £17 billion in the plan for that new railway, but it just couldn't make decisions on what should happen at Manchester Piccadilly and at the other end of the line in Liverpool. Well, the Mayor of the Liverpool City Region, Steve Rotherham, and I have a very clear plan for this railway line. We've already brought together all of the public and private stakeholders. Let's get on with it. It's 200 years since the place where I'm talking to you from now gave the world the first ever railway between Liverpool and Manchester. What a great thing it would be to do that again 200 years later. But that's just one thing that we can do. I'll also be offering to Keir to build at least our share, if not more of our share, of the 1.5 million homes he wants to build in this parliament. Greater Manchester has already allocated the sites to do that. We would like a large number of those homes to be council homes. Let's not just build more homes, let's actually deal with the housing crisis, solve the housing crisis. We think we can do that.
Keir Starmer said yesterday he's still committed to not abolishing the cap on benefit payments to families with more than 2 children. Are you disappointed by that? You've spoken before passionately that actually Labour should get rid of it.
Well, I understand how difficult the financial situation is. And I remember the Tories, when Labour left government last time, sort of going on and on about this. They've actually left us a worse inheritance than they had back in 2010. So I realise that Keir can't just go straight out and make commitments. I would just ask that it's kept under review, because we have seen grinding poverty in parts of Greater Manchester in the last 14 years. We've seen the emergence of a voluntary welfare state where communities are just having to look out for each other, look after each other. You know, we do need to see change in people's real living standards. And when it comes to kids, obviously, we want to lift as many children as we can out of poverty. And I've heard Keir's commitment to that. I would just say, you know, as and when, keep these matters under review. But we really want to have a decisive break with the austerity of the last 14 years that has been so punishing for so many people in our country.
So you want a decisive break. We were just talking to Jonathan Reynolds about how Labour actually lost support in some communities where previously they'd had strong backing. Do you have a concern about how the party has been losing some voters, particularly Muslim voters, over its position on Gaza? I know you were early calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza ahead of Labour moving to that position. Mm-hmm. Are you worried that Labour actually has overlooked some of its traditional voting?
No, I don't think it's overlooked people. Obviously, it's been a difficult issue for everybody, and proof that it has listened is that its position changed. And here in Greater Manchester, we were very pleased indeed that Rochdale came back to Labour, and Paul Waugh will be a fantastic MP there. So I think there is proof that we are regaining people's trust where we've lost it. But the proof will be in how the Labour government goes about things. I think it's made a really strong start. And, you know, the great thing about politics sometimes, Laura, is just how quickly the political weather can change. It feels already like we are in a new era with a very different, more serious government, less of the volatility. The great thing about what the British people have done is they've created a platform for political stability. You look over at France, you look at the US, lots of other countries don't have that. We now have the chance, after lots of turbulence in recent times, to have a serious government focused on growth and delivery without all of the, you know, the psychodramas of the past of the Tory Tory years. This is a great moment for the country because we can really move forward now with purpose.
Okay.
But always listening to people and making sure we carry people with us.
OK, Andy Burnham, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Manchester this morning.
You're welcome.
What did you think? Let us know. You can always email us, as you know, kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk, or if you're social media inclined, you can use the hashtag BBC Laura K, and we'll hear from you with some of the reviews at the end of the programme. Let's then talk to our panel about what was said there. Now, Sharon, let's start with you. So Jonathan Reynolds wasn't giving much away, but he did say there was money available. He said the Prime Minister has spoken to the boss of Tata Steel. He didn't quite guarantee jobs, as you asked, but what did you make of his answers on Tata Steel?
Well, look, there's no doubt that Labour coming in and the intent of what they want to do is a good thing. You know, I am glad we have a Labour government. I am the leader of a trade union, and my main focus is jobs, pay and conditions for workers. So I am going to either be, they can see me as a critical friend or a pain in the proverbial, either way. So I'm going to keep...
happy to be a pain in the
whichever
proverbial.
way they want to take that, because it's my job to make sure feet to the fire on this. The problem that we've got here is that when investment is spoken about in Britain, there is never jobs guarantees attached. And the devil here will be in the detail. Unless there are jobs guarantees attached to the investment, what Tata will do is they'll take the investment, they'll build one electric arc, they'll import green steel for the rest of it, and those jobs will walk out the door. And I'm going to keep very eagle-eyed on exactly what that detail means. And the investment could be more than what they've promised. And this moves us on to the fiscal rules and the fact that we will have to borrow to invest if we are going to invest in British industry. That is going to have to happen. But I'll be watching it very, very closely.
When you say this fiscal rules, that's the spending limits that Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, as was, now the Chancellor in number 10. Now, you didn't actually sign up to the Labour manifesto. You're a backer, but not, you weren't quite in the tent at the manifesto. But do you think that actually they're going to have to move on those rules because of reality?
I do. I mean, since 1997, the fiscal rules have changed 9 times. Fiscal rules change, and of course, when you change them, then you have more opportunity. We are going to have to borrow to invest. We haven't got time to wait for growth. People are literally hurting out there, and we're going to have to borrow to invest. And our crumbling public services need money. They absolutely need money.
Well, it was interesting. So Andy Burnham was very supportive of Keir Starmer. You could tell he's delighted by the result, but he did he did say there has to be a decisive break with austerity. It was interesting he chose that phrase. Do you think, as things stand, that Labour is on course to make a decisive break with austerity?
They're going to need to do that. They're going to need to make different choices. I don't understand why the choices are between pensioners and children. Who decided that was the choice? There are different choices that can be made. The richest families in Britain, there are 50 richest families in Britain that are worth £500 billion. That is the same as 33 million people. That's the same as half of Britain. This completely unfair society has got to be looked at. We need to invest. We're going to have to borrow to invest. That is not the same as borrowing for anything else. Borrowing to invest is absolutely the right thing to do. And we're also going to have to look at things like our crumbling public services and say, how are we going to deal with this? We can't just allow that to wait for growth. We will not get growth in time. It's a good thing to say. I understand why they're saying it. But every economist, pretty much, I've been saying it for the best part of 6 months, we are not going to be able to get that type of growth quick enough, and people won't wait. People will not wait for that delivery.
It's interesting, though, Simon, isn't it? Because the Labour leadership would say they won partly because they made these very tight promises on spending. They neutralised that fear that sometimes voters have that Labour just goes crazy with public money. What do you think of the dangers for Keir Starmer?
Well, I think actually the phrase that by which the standing of the new government will live or die is 2 words: fully costed. On the one hand, everybody knows, I think, all across the political spectrum, that this is a bread and butter. This was a bread and butter election. It was, we all know, I think, actually, that Keir Starmer's dad was a toolmaker, and this was above all a toolkit election. People very upset about things that immediately impact their daily life, waiting times for an operation under the NHS, the notion that prisons are about to be absolutely full. I'm very happy to see that, the government was prepared to appoint someone like James Timpson from outside the political circle, Patrick Vallance as Minister of Science. So these things absolutely, as Sharon was saying, need to be addressed quickly. the 40 hospital myth of the last several governments was absolutely, it was like spitting in the eyes of the electorate to say, well, we say this and it'll happen, but it won't really happen. So this is actually at the heart of the legitimacy of the new government. I just want to add one small thing. So you go with proper faith that when you said fully costed, you meant it. On the other hand, there are all these black swans in a kind of, you know, turbulent pond out there called the world economy. If we get Trump 2.0, both in foreign policy and defence spending, you know, there is trouble ahead.
So much that could happen. And we can show, actually, it was very interesting. Downing Street posted yesterday the beginnings of a conversation, the first conversation between Keir Starmer and President Biden since he moved into number 10. We could just show you a little glimpse of that now.
Mr. Prime Minister, congratulations. What a hell of a victory. Congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's been a long night and day.
Well, you can see how delighted he is there. But it was interesting they chose to put that out there in the public domain. But the sort of populism is sort of swirling around the place, as we were talking about with Jonathan Reynolds, in terms of Labour and its Muslim voting, some of its Muslim voters. When it comes to your party, Michael, how should they have handled Nigel Farage? Because Reform did such damage to the Conservatives on Thursday night.
Well, let me first of all comment on your interview with Jonathan Reynolds, because I think that exposed the differences between electioneering and campaigning and opposition on the one hand and government on the other. Government is difficult. There are difficult decisions to be made. I grew up not far from Port Talbot, so I really hope that some successful conclusion can be reached to that very difficult challenge. But there are difficulties all over the place, and you cannot just borrow and borrow without terrible consequences in terms of inflation, in terms of the whole economic fabric of our society. So it's a difficult business, and there are difficult choices to be made. What the Conservative Party has got to do in the future is to remember that it is a national party. And in due course, and it's going to take time, we're going to have to come up with policies that reflect the needs of the whole nation. It's not going to be any good devising policies that appeal to narrow sections of the electorate.
And was that the mistake in the campaign?
I don't think it was. But I think, you know, there will be an inquest of sorts, but I think it's much more important to concentrate on the future and to concentrate on what the Conservative Party can do and become in the future. We all agree that the electorate is extremely volatile. The difference in the vote share was much less than the difference in the number of seats. So there is an important role for the Conservative Party in holding the government to account over the next few years as an effective opposition, and then coming up with policies which will be the right policies for the challenges that then face our country.
And who do you think could do that?
I don't even know who the candidates are yet. Laura.
You'll have to wait and see.
Laura,
Yes,
can I just say, just on the borrow to invest point, because it is really important, is that it is really important that we do borrow to invest, because if we want growth, we are going to have to do that. And our debt to GDP is around 99%. In America, it's 128%. We have wiggle room. Their economy is growing. If we want to grow the economy, we're going to have to invest in British business.
Sharon, they have the enormous advantage of being a reserve currency, which makes a huge difference. You can't borrow to invest, Michael.
You can't borrow
unless people are prepared to lend to you on reasonable terms. That's the key fact.
And that is what they need to look at. Borrow to invest has to happen.
See, the election is over, but the arguments are not. They never are in politics. Thank you all for now. Well, only 121 Tory MPs managed to cling on. Even the former Prime Minister, Liz Truss, was booted out. It was a personal disaster for her successor, Rishi Sunak, the Conservative Party's worst defeat in its modern history.
The Labour Party has won this general election.
British people trusted them more than us.
Clearly a terrible night for the Conservatives.
I'm sorry.
We're going to have to get together again and figure out what it is that we've done wrong.
We've tried the patience of traditional Conservative voters with a propensity to create an endless political soap opera.
The Conservative Party has let you down.
Jacob Rees-Mogg losing his seat there.
The Conservative Party took its core vote for granted.
We have received a strong indication that Liz Truss has lost. For a brief time as Prime Minister, you were part of the people in power who were overseeing those things not being delivered.
I agree, I was part of that. Our renewal as a party and a country will not be achieved by us talking to an ever smaller slice of ourselves.
Cutting a lonely figure, the Tory party cheering.
This is an election that the Conservatives lost much more than Labour won.
You have sent a clear signal that the government of the United Kingdom must change.
Well, Rishi Sunak is resigning as Tory leader after the terrible results, so of course that creates a vacancy. And the Tories must work out who is next, as well as how they can move on. Well, Victoria Atkins, who might fancy the job, is here. She's the Shadow Health Secretary now, having been the Health Secretary. What do you think went wrong?
Well, good morning, Laura. And first and foremost, I think we all understand, as you've seen from some of those shots, that the voters wanted a change. And we are going to have to look hard and long at ourselves as to why they wanted that change. But for me, I think one of the issues is going to be the issue of trust. And as part of that, we need to ask ourselves some very hard questions about delivery, about integrity, and also about our values. But underlying all of this, of course, we have to talk as a unified party, because I'm very, very conscious we lost very many wonderful colleagues and friends on Thursday night who worked their socks off as MPs and as candidates, but also, of course, other candidates and our volunteers who did so much work over this 6-week period to try to elect more Conservative MPs.
It's interesting there you say you have to look like one unit. Yeah. I mean, is part of what you think went wrong the fact that, you know, weekend after weekend in here and year after year on TV, in the papers, we saw Conservatives knocking lumps out of each other. Do you think that's what did for you, a lack of discipline?
I think, you know, voters want their government to deliver for them. When I'm walking around my constituency, voters are concerned that we have their interests at heart, whether it's healthcare, whether it's supporting local businesses, whether it's ensuring that migration continues to fall. And the moment we start to lead conversations away from those essential elements, that then brings into question our delivery, but also what we as a party are about, our values. And for me, I think one of the messages, and please don't think I'm trying to turn away from the very loud, clear messages to us as a party, but I do observe that the support for the Labour Party in this election has spread very thinly, a little bit like margarine. And so I think there's a real opportunity for us as a party, once we have reflected, once we have absolutely taken on board those lessons and acted on them, I think there's a real job for us to do to rebuild our party, and we will do that. We will get there.
What went wrong with your values, though?
So I think with we know that the country actually is instinctively conservative. If you look, people want lower taxes. I'm not sure they'll agree with Sharon's assessment about borrowing more to spend more because of the impact this is going to have on inflation.
Do you think the country is still
much
instinctively conservative when they booted you out and you've got your worst defeat ever?
Well, I do. In terms of their values, their instincts, they are, I believe, still instinctively conservative. They want lower taxes. They want to build a better future for their children. They want us to help them thrive in their personal lives and in their livelihoods. And so those values are important to us all. What we need to do is to make sure that we are acting on those values, but also ensuring that we have policies that deliver on the sorts of issues that were being raised.
What was it that was wrong, though? So if the country has dramatically kicked you out, this is not a kind of standard defeat. Labour won a landslide. What was it that was wrong?
So I think, as I said at the beginning, it's about trust. And for me, there are a couple of elements we want to look at as part of this. And by the way, we're 72 hours away from the result. We haven't even met yet as a parliamentary party. We've got to talk to our members, our volunteers and so on. But I imagine we will want to be looking at how we have delivered on our policies. We have, over the 14 years, there is some real success, including, for example, in education. We can be proud of the fact that we have the best readers in the Western world. We can be proud of the fact that 800 jobs were created a day. We can be proud of the fact that we brought in gay marriage. These sorts of, but we also need to acknowledge that there are areas where we wanted to do more and wanted to show progress. And I, of course, feel that very strongly as Shadow Health Secretary now.
Are you going to run?
This weekend is not about leadership. I mean, there's an awful lot going.
It is about the what as well as the who. I mean, would our viewers be surprised if in a few days they see on the TV or hear on the radio that you've announced that you are going to run for leadership?
So my absolute focus at the moment, and the reason I came on today, was genuinely not to talk about leadership, because this is not the moment for this. We need to show the public that we understand they have sent us some very, very loud messages, that we are listening, that we are reflecting. And then we as a party need to get together and unite and work out what we want for the future.
But do you think you have what it takes?
I think it would, for anyone at this stage to be talking about their own ambitions, goes to what we were talking about at the very beginning of this, which is politics and the Conservative Party needs to be at the forefront of everything that we're talking about.
But you started this interview talking about trust and being honest with voters and being honest. Wouldn't it be maybe refreshingly honest to be honest about your ambition? Because even Oliver Dowden, who was the Deputy Prime Minister, has been overheard saying that he thinks you should be the leader. Everybody knows that there's been a sort of shadow leadership race running for a very long time.
I think genuinely at this point in time, it should not be about personalities and about people. The Conservative Party is bigger than any one member, and indeed our focus has to be on the country. And I hope and expect that in due course, when a leadership contest is held, that everybody involved is going to be, uniting around the central message that we are all in this for our constituents and for the electorate of the United Kingdom. That must be the message that we send out.
Victoria Atkins, thank you very much indeed for coming in this morning. Well, different MPs in the Tory party have very different diagnoses of how to cure the party's ills. Robert Jenrick quit as Rishi Sunak's immigration minister just before Christmas. On Thursday, he hung on to his Newark seat.
Robert Jenrick is duly elected Member of Parliament for the Newark constituency.
So he held on, but with a much reduced majority, he is now the last Tory MP in Nottinghamshire. In the Sunday Times today, he's blamed the Tories' defeat on their failure to deliver, particularly on immigration. He's with us now this morning. Good morning, Mr. Jenner. Thank you for coming in. Why do you think the public gave your party such a kicking?
Well, look, this was a devastating defeat, the worst for our party since 1832. And there are so many brilliant, dedicated public servants, my former colleagues, who lost their jobs, and I feel desperately sorry for them. But my argument is that the reason that we lost the trust and of millions of people across the country is not because we were too left-wing or right-wing or had this slogan or that slogan, but fundamentally because we failed to deliver on the promises that we made to the British public.
So you didn't do the things you said you were going to do?
Well, in 2019, we promised that we would get Brexit done and that we would deliver a strong economy, a strong NHS and secure borders. And although there are many things that I will fiercely defend about the record of our party in government, and we did get Brexit done, we did not deliver the level of growth and taxation that Conservatives expect, the quality of service in the NHS that the public need, and above all, the secure borders and controlled and reduced migration that we promised and which we need to deliver.
So you broke promises that you made to the public, that's why you got booted out?
I think there's so many things that we should be proud of as a government, but we will only begin the long road of winning back the trust and the faith of the public if we're honest. And that is why I'm being painfully honest today and in the article I wrote in the Sunday Times about what's gone wrong. Because as a party, we've got to have a shared diagnosis of what happened. We've got to have a common set of principles that we can unite around. The Conservative Party is a broad church, but it's got to have a common creed. And if we can do that in the weeks and months ahead, then we can begin that long road of regaining trust and confidence and holding the Labour Party to account.
But why didn't you keep those promises? What was it? Was it because you were too busy all arguing about Brexit? Was it because there were questions about the behaviour of ministers in government and all the things that happened under Boris Johnson and his relationship with the truth? What was it that stopped you? You know, who bears responsibility for your failure to keep those promises which you've outlined?
Well, I don't think it's about any one individual. We're all responsible for what happened. In politics, you win or you lose as a team. But what we've got to learn is, why did we not deliver on those central promises? Above all, immigration, but not exclusively immigration. And I think it was a number of things. We didn't have a good enough diagnosis of just how broken some of our public services were, and we didn't have the willingness to take the tough decisions that were necessary to deliver for the British public. When we said, for example, on immigration, that we would do whatever it takes, we didn't do whatever it takes. And it's only by showing the public that going forwards, the Conservative Party understands that we didn't do what was necessary on those crucial issues, and making clear that if we're ever fortunate enough to be in politics, in government again, we will do that, that I think we can begin to earn the public's trust back again. And of those things, it is crucial that we understand that migration was at the heart of it. 2/3 of the constituencies that sadly we lost on the general election, the majorities, the margin of defeat was less than the Reform vote. And that's the case in the north, the south, in Scotland, Wales, everywhere, including, for example, in seats that we lost to the Liberal Democrats. And so on that issue, not exclusively, but above all that issue, we've got to ensure the Conservative Party takes a fundamentally different approach.
And you said you're being painfully honest, and the party has to be painfully honest. So can you be honest about your own ambition? Do you think you have what it takes?
I honestly don't think that 3 days on from a general election in which we've just lost so many of our friends and colleagues, that it is right to have self-indulgent conversations like this. The reason I came on your programme, Laura, is because I care about the Conservative Party. I've been a member of this party since 1997, when I was 16 years of age. I've been with it through thick and thin. I want to ensure that it has the right diagnosis of what's gone wrong. And that diagnosis is not about personalities, it's about principles and ideas, not individuals.
Let's talk about in principle, because also with respect, I think it's quite clear to most of our viewers that you and Victoria Atkins both are partly here because you have ambitions and you want to at least be considered to be in the running for the party leadership. And I think our viewers will know that very clearly, even though both of you are being slightly coy this morning. Do you believe in principle that you might have what it takes to be the party leader?
I'm honestly, Laura, not going to get into that because I think that is self-indulgent. I think the first step for the party is to have a proper, honest diagnosis about what's gone wrong.
And does that mean a long campaign, a long handover?
I would support a longer campaign. I think that we as a party have to think very carefully about what's happened. And once we have that, unite behind that common set of true Conservative principles and move forward. And above all, hold Keir Starmer to account. The country needs the Conservative Party right now to provide a strong opposition.
OK, Robert Jenrick, thanks very much indeed for coming in. And I have to say this morning, I wouldn't be amazingly surprised, probably neither would you, if within a certain amount of time, either Victoria Atkins or Robert Jenrick do declare their intentions. But this morning, they're both offering their diagnosis of what went wrong, and we're grateful to them for coming in. Now, this election made history for all sorts of reasons. And when you put the votes together, the smaller parties got their highest ever share of the votes. Maybe it was the bungee jumping, or maybe, given that the Liberal Democrats want to change the voting system, ironically, perhaps they just learned how to play it better by ruthlessly targeting seats where the Conservatives had held them. Well, there he is, Ed Davey, the happiest man in Britain, he looked like there, celebrating winning more than 70 seats, and he joins us this morning from southwest London. Ed Davey, congratulations, I suppose, on your more than 70 seats. Why do you think you did so well, and what do you plan to do with all these new MPs?
Well, Laura, thank you very much for coming and taking me from southwest London so I can spend more of today with my family, who I've missed a lot over the last few weeks. It was an amazing result for the Liberal Democrats. We got 72 seats, with the last one coming in just yesterday. And we're very excited about this opportunity. We fought the campaign, putting health and care at the top of our list, and we're going to fight in Parliament to campaign for health and care. I've already called for an emergency budget for health and care this month, so we can start rescuing our NHS, which is on its knees because of the Conservatives.
You were very energetically in the campaign criticising the Conservatives. Are you going to be just as energetic in going after the Labour Party?
Well, we're going to be constructive opposition. We fought the election on health and care and the costs of living, on ending the sewage scandal, and in the Parliament we will focus on those issues, and we will urge the government to go further. We've already started that by calling for the emergency budget on health and care, and I want to make sure they respond. I mean, one thing I was disappointed in Labour's manifesto was it didn't mention family carers or unpaid carers, who are absolutely critical, and I've made very clear that the Liberal Democrats will be the voice of carers, and we will challenge the government to make sure they deliver for the millions of people looking after their loved ones.
But when Labour has this enormous majority, how are you actually going to make them pay any attention to you? Because they don't have to. They're not under any obligation, and they have raw power now. They don't have to pay attention to the Liberal Democrats.
Well, by the strength of our arguments, we've managed over a number of years to persuade people to steal our policies, and that's a really good idea. So even in opposition, it was the Liberal Democrats who argued for a windfall tax on the huge profits of the oil and gas companies made on the back of President Putin in his illegal invasion of Ukraine. It was Liberal Democrats making that argument to help people with their energy bills. In 3 months after we made it, Labour Party stole that idea. So I'm hoping, as we argue for health and care, we argue for ending the sewage scandal, we argue for action on the cost of living, that the Labour government will realise that we actually have the best arguments, the best policies, and take them, and that would be great.
Reform UK got many more votes than you, but have ended up with far, far fewer seats. Is that fair?
Well, you know, Laura, that Liberal Democrats have long argued for fair votes, long argued for electoral reform and proportional representation. We want to improve our democracy. Our politics is broken. And so we're going to continue to make that case. It might mean that there'll be people who are elected who we don't agree with. But by the way, that's been the case in the first past the post. There are many people in the Conservative Party who seem to share the values and ideas of reform, and they're already there.
But in terms of your belief in reforming the voting system, I mean, if you reformed the voting system under proportional representation, which you have long argued for, would you be happy then to see Reform UK being the third biggest party and not the Liberal Democrats?
Well, I believe in democracy, and I believe in taking forward your ideas for political reform. People will get voted in who you don't agree with. Under first past the post, people in reform have got elected too, and people in the Conservative Party who are very close to reform have got elected. But that's democracy. That's allowing the people to express their will. I'm just very proud that the Liberal Democrats have managed to do record results. I mean, our best ever. Certainly the largest third party in Parliament in British political history, and I'm determined that our amazing candidates will be local champions for their area and put forward the values, the Liberal Democrat values, which I think are more in tune with the British electorate than anyone else.
OK, Sir Ed Davey, Lib Dem leader with a huge new cohort of MPs. Thanks very much for joining us this morning, and enjoy that day with your family. It's been a long campaign for everybody. Thank you very much indeed. Well, Labour history has been made in the last few days sweeter for that party because of how rarely they win. Only 4 of their leaders have ever won an election with a majority. Here are Starmer's predecessors.
Labour's policy is the only policy that can lead us to peace abroad and social justice at home.
Prime Minister Tony Blair entered Downing Street in triumph today after the biggest election victory in Labour's history.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
Now our country has voted decisively for change.
Well, Simon, which previous Labour Prime Minister do you think Keir Starmer will be most like?
Well, I think he's going to be most like himself, actually, rather than... I mean, there are bits of Harold Wilson's, refusal to be up in the sky, except for the white heat of technology. There are some things about Clement Attlee, but I think that's, less important, forgive me, Laura, than saying this, which is, I suppose, is self-evident, but it is worth saying on your programme on a Sunday morning that for someone who lives a lot of the time, most of the time in the United States, where the putative nominee for the Republican Party has already said that it's not necessarily going to be the case that he will accept the result of the election. The transfer of power so peacefully, so generously stated in Rishi Sunak's rather wonderful speech is a majestic thing that we can't take for granted. We have right now, historically, merciless problems of climate change, of the next pandemic, which I fear is probably around the corner, wars we didn't think would happen again in Europe and elsewhere and the Middle East. So how democracy endures in facing these things is the ultimate, problem. And when democracy it's certainly on the back foot, but it is not down and out. It is Narendra Modi did not get a triumphant majority. In all likelihood, Marine Le Pen will not get an absolute majority today.
Well,
we should be grateful and celebrating that, and have a glass of something stiff at lunch this Sunday.
Sharon, what kind of Prime Minister do you think Keir Starmer will be? Because, you're going to be a tough customer. You're in the Labour movement, but you're a tough customer for them.
Well, look, I'd like them to be like a 1945 transformational government. That's what I would like them to be. And just listening to the two people you were interviewing there in terms from the Tories, I still don't think the penny has dropped yet. That actually people are hurting to a degree that really is beyond anything I've ever seen before. And I have 1.1 million workers in my union, and I'm out there all the time. And for me, I don't think what they've taken into account, that we had the 2008 crash and workers and communities paid the price, and they've just given bankers back their bonuses prior to the new government coming in. We had COVID. And it was workers, low-paid workers, who went out there and dealt with that. It wasn't city bankers, it was low-paid workers. And then when they came back, they were told you're not getting a pay rise. Something has got to stop. And that's why I do say to Labour, it's a big moment for them. And I think they're going to rise to the challenge, but I'll be on their tail to make sure it's a big moment for them. And they need to grasp the nettle. They really need to make it count.
OK, and Michael Howard, it's a big day for you. I've just been told it's your birthday. So happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
We'd like to celebrate things in this studio. But you heard, though, those two not ready to declare being candidates, but we think they're both likely to be candidates for the Tory leadership. Do you think that the Conservatives could actually get their act together in time for the next general election, or will it be a long period in opposition?
Well, obviously, I hope that it can be possible to do it in time for the next election. We will just have to wait and see. But I do think that it is important that the Conservative Party takes time to look at all the candidates, takes time to choose its leader, and takes time to think very hard about how it can best respond to the challenges facing our country on a national level, not appealing to sections of the electorate, but really identifying the challenges which our country faces and coming up with the right answers which will benefit everyone.
OK, thank you, all three of you, so much for being with us this morning. It's interesting. It seems to be the move in the Tory parties towards having a longer campaign so they can take time, but we will see what happens. Lots of you have been in touch on this important weekend. We've put your questions to politicians through the campaign. What is on your mind this morning? Well, Rosie Keady told us it's such a relief to hear grown-up politicians like Jonathan and Andy Burnham. It feels like a new dawn. I'm feeling good. Well, Trevor said, how does Starmer have a mandate when nearly 2 out of 3 voters rejected Labour? Colin Archer said, no party should be in power for longer than 14 years. If it were, we'd have an autocracy. Thank you so much to you for watching today. Thank you to my trio at the desk. And thanks for spending your Sunday morning with us as the new government gets going. Labour is savouring its victory right now, but they are not or shouldn't be under any illusions about what lies ahead. We have heard this morning already the tricky demands that face the steel industry. What will the government do? Well, across the BBC today, there'll be coverage of the Prime Minister's visits to Scotland and Northern Ireland. I'll be with Paddy O'Connell later for Sunday's newscast on BBC Sounds. And of course, you can catch up with anything from these momentous few days as ever on iPlayer. But I will look forward to seeing you next Sunday, same time, same place.
Glorious. Glorious, glorious. Well, not the show. You know, I hate fucking Laura Kuenssberg. But can't wait for Prime Minister's questions this week. It's going to be so interesting. Nigel Farage is an MP and Tice. That's mental. No more waffly SNP. Woo! So yeah, it's going to be interesting. just seeing little short pants Reece on the other side of the bench. And the jeers. Yeah. Brilliant. You will see me tomorrow. I'm going to have to stream like normal now. So I will be on constantly. Might as well, because it's going to be interesting. So I'll see you tomorrow for Politics Live. 12:15 as usual. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And yeah, have a good day.